Welcome, everyone, to Montessori 101, a live show from Child of the Redwoods, all about the magic of Montessori. We believe that every child deserves a Montessori education. I'm Aubrey Hargis.
I'm David Hargis. So whether you're joining us live, we love having you here, or you're watching replay, also great. Or maybe you're just listening to the podcast, it doesn't matter. We're so happy to have you with us today. And if you'd like to learn more about Child of the Redwoods, if you're new to our organization, you can head over to childoftheredwoods.com.
Yes. So today we are doing our next installment of the Montessori Essentials list. And today's little deep dive is the movable alphabet.
That's right.
So we're going to talk about teaching children to write before they learn to read.
Such a unique thing in Montessori, don't you think?
It is. So you can get a full copy of our essentials list at childoftheredwoods.com/essentials. And it's free. And you'll just see like all 21 of the things that we recommend that anyone in Montessori have around the home for their
That's
child.
right.
Yep.
Including this one.
Yes.
So what exactly are we talking about? Let's go ahead and jump right in. We're talking about the movable alphabet. And it is, as the name would imply, a set of letters. Traditionally, they're cut from wood. I'm holding up one here. If you're just listening, I've got the letter M in cursive. They're generally cut from like a thin piece of wood, and they can then be laid out on a surface, a mat, or a table like we have here to spell out words. There are both upper and lowercase versions. There are cursive, like the one I just showed you here. And I'm trying to show that a little nicely here. And there's also the print versions. In the common American version, you're going to have 26 letters for the 26 letters of the American English alphabet.
Plus, you could add punctuation.
Plus, you can add punctuation. That's right.
That's sometimes included.
And if you are not an English speaker, that's A-OK, of course, because there are sets that have those unique characters as well. And in all cases, though, whether you're getting a cursive set or a block print set or big or little, they're always going to be red for the consonants and blue. Probably have these backwards on the camera. Blue for the vowels, and that is intentional because it matches the sandpaper letters. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but this is meant to go along with that. It's a step in the process. So you can buy or you can make a set. Either way, we'll talk a little bit about how to make your own if you want at the end of this. But if you do make your own, just make sure you make multiples of each letter. There's not, as far as I know, a set number of letters for each one. I saw like on average is 10 for a consonant, maybe 15 or so for vowels. You need enough in order to make longer words or write out phrases and sentences. The more you have, the more functionality you have. So as long as they're, I think probably the important thing is that they're red and blue. That would be, if you want to be consistent with Montessori. And I guess even if stripping that away, what you want is a set of wooden or a set of letters that you can use to spell out things. So when you were a classroom teacher, did you make your own? I don't remember, actually.
You don't remember?
I don't, because you made so many things. I remember making beads and I remember making all kinds of, I don't remember. Yes. Did you make a movable alphabet?
We did make a movable alphabet. So the movable alphabet that I made, I was teaching public school first. So I was just looking for a set of letters, and I found a little tub of plastic letters. They already had the letters on them.
Yes.
We found it, I think, at the store Lakeshore, and I'm pretty sure they still sell it. But you might notice in educational supply stores like a tub of letters. And when I really look for them and I'm like, ooh, that would be good for a movable alphabet, it's usually if they are lowercase letters, because you'll see a lot of alphabet type of things. Sometimes they're uppercase, but in Montessori, we really want to go with lowercase. So I looked for some lowercase letters, and I wasn't really picky about what they were made out of. It turns out that we were able to find this little tub of tiled letters.
Oh, yes. I remember those.
So the thing is, they were all black and white.
And
they
so
were little white tiles.
I remember those.
Yes, you probably remember me actually using the Sharpies. But they were little white and black tiles with the letters written in black and just little white tiles about this big. So maybe
like a Scrabble tile style.
Yeah, like an inch by an inch.
Bigger than that.
Half an inch by half
plastic.
Inch.
White.
Little. Yeah, they were little. And so they were not color coded.
Nope.
red, or blue. And so I did it myself. I actually color coded them, and I actually color coded them the opposite to traditional movable alphabet is color coded. And I did that because I was modeling it after some of the other supplies that we had in our traditional public school that were just like red and blue. And so I just chose red for the vowels and blue for the consonants. And it turns out in traditional Montessori movable alphabet set, it's reversed. It's actually red for the consonants and blue for the vowels.
But what you're saying is important because it's not, there's no magic to the fact that one is blue and one is red.
Yeah.
It's that they're different colors.
Yes. It's just like whatever colors you want to use, just make sure that there are two very different looking colors. So I probably wouldn't go with like yellow for the consonants and a light orange for the vowels. You want to choose something very contrasty. So you're looking for like an orange and a green, or you're looking for like a brown and a yellow, or, you know, something very with a sharp contrast. And so that's why Maria Montessori herself chose these two colors. It's just they're high contrast so that you can really, when you spell out a letter, you can really quickly zone in on, oop, these are consonants, and oop, these are vowels.
Because the lessons, and we'll talk about that, you get to this step where you're going to start swapping in specific, let's say, vowels to make CVC words or whatever. And when they're color coded, it's so much easier.
Yeah. So you said CVC. So for our listeners,
sorry.
People, so a CVC would be consonant, vowel, consonant, word. And an example of that would be the word map. And so here, and again, I'm probably going to show you this in reverse. I don't know. We'll see. So M, and then A is the vowel. So we've got consonant, vowel,
and then
consonant. That's totally backwards. The way I've got
well, it would be the word map.
The word map, if we could figure out how to
but
do
you
that
could then
on
change
video.
that to the word mop.
Yes.
So consonant, vowel, consonant, M-O-P. And that's the fun that you have with these letters. Now, what I remember, because I'm sorry to interrupt you, because the thing I remember is you bought the tiles. I remember this now.
Yeah.
And then you took a Sharpie, and I think you colored at the bottom red. You didn't color the whole thing. You just highlighted on the bottom. I used to find them around in the house for years.
You probably still can.
So, it wasn't super elaborate, but it did the trick, right?
Yeah.
It highlighted that there's some things that we call consonants. There's some things that we call vowels. And that in English, at least, every word is going to have a vowel. And then you can then start to make different combinations to make different words. And sometimes those words have very similar combinations.
Yes.
And that is pretty cool.
So in Montessori, we have this concept that writing comes before reading. And this is a fact that is becoming increasingly well known in the reading community online and in public education, traditional education circles, as well as Montessori. But it's something that as Montessorians we've been doing for a long, long time. We've known writing actually comes before reading. And if you teach a child to read before they can write, you're going to run into trouble because they're going to start just like memorizing whole word chunks, and they will miss the beautiful mystery of decoding, which is looking at a word and sounding out each of its parts. And this sounding out each of its parts, the ability to put sounds together into words, is crucial if you want strong readers. So in many education circles, what we were doing in traditional education was teaching children how to read first rather than teaching them the parts of the writing, of the actual, like how to build a word. And so children were just they just weren't as strong of readers.
You might have called them sight words, which we actually still use, or whole language was a theory for a while. And it was the idea that you would memorize the words, and there was a debate.
Well, whole language actually is complicated.
Well, the idea though is that
it wasn't just that; it came with a lot of things. But
the idea was that you didn't necessarily focus on the phonetics, the sounds of the letters.
Right.
You could focus on just sort of the word itself and recognizing the word.
Yes.
And so you're right; it's more complex than that. But that's the idea, and we put that debate aside long ago. We now know that there's a place for sight words, and there's also a role for phonetics. And something that's great about the movable alphabet is that it lets you do that.
Yes.
But if you start with reading, you miss that step. Is that right?
Yeah. You do. If your goal is I'm going to teach reading, and you just start off trying to teach children how to read words, then you actually do miss the step. So Maria Montessori discovered some amazing things. So during her classroom, a little bit about the history behind the movable alphabet is that one day she was actually writing. She'd been working with children for quite some time in her little classroom, and she started to write things. She wrote a lot of things on the chalkboard.
Yep.
But instead, she didn't have children like copy from the chalkboard themselves. She would just like write little notes. Sometimes, in the morning she would come in, she would write, "Hello, children, it's going to be a beautiful day," or just whatever she wanted to write. And, or she might write notes to herself or just like lists and things. And one day some of the children came in and they actually read what she wrote on the chalkboard. They were like, "Oh, look." And they had gathered themselves over and they were like reading what she wrote.
Yeah.
Had I told you this story
No,
before?
I don't know this one. Well, maybe I read it, but yeah.
Yes, and she came, so she she was doing something else, and then she looked up and she was shocked that these children were all reading what was on the board because she didn't think that they could read. Like she actually didn't know that they could read, and here they were like referencing the chalkboard and teaching each other, like reading the words out loud, and they were sounding them out. And so it was like there's this big epiphany moment for her that children actually could teach themselves to read, that they didn't need someone to like teach them how to read. Yes, they needed someone to help them learn how to write, and we can do that by giving them these beautiful materials. But the children actually didn't need to be taught how to read, that they could teach themselves. And then they themselves became empowered. They started dancing all around the room. Like, "I learned how to read. I taught myself how to read." And she'd be like, "Yes, you did. You did. You did it. You taught yourself how to read." And so then they began teaching each other how to read, and it just became this explosion of readers in her classroom. And so this was revolutionary, and people came from all over the world to see these children. So, we think of them as just like Maria made these discoveries. She wrote it down in a book called The Montessori Method, and that was that. Right? She started training teachers, but no, this was a worldwide phenomenon. This is what was happening inside her classroom. So people came from all over and would sit in and just wanted to like watch, and see the children teach themselves to read, because this was just unheard of. Because at the time, the way you taught a person to read was waiting until they were like 7 or 8 years old and in first grade. And then you would give them words, you would dictate words for them to copy. And then through that process, they would then learn to read and write. But Maria was saying, you know what? All I did was I just gave the children these keys to learning, and they just magically taught themselves, So it was very, very exciting, and it was exciting to the whole world. And when the people did come into the classroom to observe, what they saw was the children playing with these letters like they were toys. Like they would just sit down and they just like, I wonder what would happen if MEP went together. Or how about MOP? I mean, they were just like mixing them up. How about the sounds of and how funny. It doesn't really mean anything, but how fun, right? So they just kind of play in that way. And in the way that they play with blocks, they would do the same with the letters. And Maria, she felt like her job was just like to name these things for the children. And so the children would be like, "What is this?" They would run up to her. And this was the sandpaper letters at first, right? They would run up to her and they would say, "What is this? What is this?" And she would say, "Oh, that's And they would run back and they would say, "She said it's and then, you could just imagine the children racing back to this box of letters. And we'll give you a peek into one of the sets you could buy, although you can DIY many of the sets. Okay, it's just one set. This is of cursive letters, and they're all organized, from A to Z, with appropriate size boxes for each thing. Some of them are combined, and the children would actually have to hunt for the letters. So this was sharpening their eyes and their visual discrimination skills. And even if you look in this box, you'll see that it's actually quite difficult to tell the difference, between. So if you
especially I found with this cursive set, especially
with this cursive set. So if you put it down and you just like hunt for the G sound, it's actually, as adults, we find it much more laborious.
Yeah.
But as a child, it's almost like a game. It's like a puzzle game. They're like hunting for the letter and they pick one up. Is this it? No, this is not it. Oh, let's look at this. And they often would do this work together, like in a partnership type of learning style. So for those of you with children at home, with just like one child at home, this might be something you do together. If you have 2 children or more children at home, they might find it something fun to do together, this word building. But eventually, through building these words, they do learn to write the words, right? Without even using a pencil.
Yep.
Yeah. So the key thing to remember about this, if you are thinking about using a movable alphabet at home, is that the most exciting thing about this particular activity, the movable alphabet, and why teaching children to read by the way of teaching children to write is so incredibly effective, is because it is motivating, because the children are actually writing down their own thoughts. So in the old school way, you're saying, okay, now write the word cat, and here's how it's spelled, and now you copy it, and now write the word, now write this word, now write this word, and you're just copying it. That is the boring way to learn to write and read.
That's right.
But with Maria's way, the children are just writing whatever they want. And so they and the length doesn't even matter to them. So we could play around and like give them little word family words, like let's write mat and mop and, these little words. Or we can just say, what do you want to write? And maybe they want to write snuffleupagus because they've been watching Sesame Street or something.
Right.
And to us, we're like, snuffleupagus? I don't even know how to spell that myself.
That's right.
That is a really long, complicated name. And it's a made-up name. Like, I don't even know how to do that. But for sure, a child who knows their sounds will be able to write snuffleupagus without a problem. Just as easily as they could write cat. Yep. And so that is part of the magic, so, and it's super motivating, would you rather learn to write some boring word like lamp or, or would you like to write some kind of exciting word like snuffleupagus, or I don't know, the scientific name for octopus, whatever that is.
Yeah. And I bet you out there as adults have experienced this. I know I've experienced something like this, not just when I learned to read, which I don't remember, it's been too long, but when I learned to play the guitar, when they teach you the guitar, they often, you buy those beginner books and it's often like row, row, row your boat, or, make these chord progressions. And I didn't do that. I wanted to learn how to play Beatles songs. So I bought a book of tablature that showed the chords, and then I slowly learned the chords. And as I learned the chord, then I would be like, okay, now I can play this song, and I can play this song if I learned another chord. And I really actually learned to play and enjoyed the process of learning so much more than when I tried to follow just sort of the regular books. And it's because it was meaningful to me. It was like spelling snuffleupagus.
Yes.
And so that's I love to emphasize that the things that work for you work for our children as well. And if you think about what you also value as an adult and the experience you've had learning, and you apply those to children, you're on the right track.
Yes.
For sure. So let's talk about why we use this tool. It is, I think, in some ways, a transitional tool, right? They come after the sandpaper letters.
Correct.
But you're going to use them before a utensil. And one of the things that makes them important is that they let kids learn to spell without worrying about the pencil grip or the fine motor skills. I mean, holding this up even as an adult, it's very delicate, but
and they come in different sizes too. This is a small set.
It's a small set, and a child's hand is a little bit smaller than my big man hand here, but it is easier still than trying to grip a pencil, which is great because it means they can build confidence. They can do more self-guided learning and work. Working with a utensil is much, much harder because it requires all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the process of language, like holding it, keeping it in a line, making sure that the letters are shaped correctly or not inverted, making them consistently spaced. There's all kinds of other things you have to learn in order to write with a utensil.
Can I interrupt you? I will say that in Montessori, we have a different lessons for learning to use a pencil.
Exactly. And that's the other thing I was going to say. So you will be concurrently teaching with these other lessons. You have tracing letters and insets, and you have the sandbox where you might be making shapes. And some of the other things we've talked about, even in this, like even using your a small pincher grip to pick up the smallest cube from the pink tower, those fine motor skill lessons are building up the things that the child will use when it comes to using finally using a utensil like a pencil
Right.
or a pen to write. But you're not lumping them all together. You're letting the child focus on the specific skills that are
Mhm.
relevant to that lesson. So when you give them something like an M, and not making them write it, it's very, very freeing, and it lets them really focus. The other thing that's cool about this that is so amazing about Maria's work is that it so perfectly represents that progression from concrete to abstract, right? So if you think about how, if we are to write a line, so what is, I mean, I want you to really literally think about it. If I take a pen, it's a thing of ink that is going to come out in some kind of shape on a piece of paper. And I'm going to call the thing that I make a letter. It's incredibly abstract. Now, as adults, we take it for granted because we just look around and, we have a print rich world. And so I just like letters, 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 draw, 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 abstract. And that takes a lot of cognitive thinking skills that a younger child isn't quite ready for. They're in a sensorial plane still, that first plane. And so when we want the child to learn, we don't want to set them up with all these very complex abstract things like this squiggle thing actually is the letter M. We want to start them with more tactile things like a sandpaper letter. And then from a sandpaper letter to a movable alphabet letter. And then in time, as their brain is developing and they're going from that first to the second plane, around the age of 6 or so, they're going to start to build those mental processes that are going to allow them to make that judgment and go from the concrete to the abstract. And you're going to have scaffolded or stair stepped or guided them along the way. Now, the one thing I want to impress here, and you talked about how and it is an amazing story about Maria and the kids kind of learning. I want to really impress that reading is not a native natural human skill. Like we can all obviously learn to do it, but we invented it. We invented writing about 5,000 years ago in various places around the world. So if you think about compared to language, spoken language, music, art, cooking, any other kind of fundamental things that we have, it's a pretty new invention. And because of that, we need to always understand that humans have to learn it. Now we can learn it. Obviously, we invented it.
Mhm.
But what's important to remember is that no two people are going to learn it in exactly the same way. And sometimes parents get really, really concerned if they look at some kind of a abstract benchmark where they're comparing their child to a sibling or to another person saying, why are they getting the N letter? Why can't they write that yet?
Yes.
It's important to remember that it's hard. Learning to read and write is hard. It's something that we invented fairly recently and we have to work at over time. Not everybody's going to learn it in the same path. Don't let that kind of anxiety overwhelm you. Enjoy the process of learning. As you go through the milestones, there are things to watch for. And then there are moments when you can bring in extra resources if you need it. But I just really like to underscore that reading it and writing take effort and be patient with it and don't over criticize yourself if you feel like your child's not getting it as fast as you imagine they would.
Yeah, we in Montessori tend to introduce these materials to so children can learn to write much earlier. So by the age of 4, 4.5, your child might be using the movable alphabet and starting to write on their own, and they could be a pretty proficient reader by the time they get into first grade.
Totally.
Or your child might not be developmentally ready for it yet.
Totally.
So there's no rush. It's just an offering. What we're not doing, we're not trying to rush the child academically.
Yeah, we're not
Right.
delaying the exposure. We're
Yes.
providing it to them, but as you say, we're not trying to rush it. So,
Right.
how would you actually use it? Do you want to? I mean, there's a lot of lessons that go with it, but do you want to give some basic tips for those out there who are
Yeah.
listening in?
Yeah, I think if I were to talk to a parent who just bought a movable alphabet and they
Yeah.
wanted to know what to do with it, you might just take the box itself and talk about it with your child. And presumably, by the time you give them this movable alphabet, they know all their letters sounds already. So you've already explored, like they already know that when they pick this up, it says good. Right. So this is just a new way to experience it. So you'll have already used something like sandpaper letters by the
Mhm.
time you get here. But yeah, I would just get it out, and you and your child just spend some time enjoying exploring it. See what letters they recognize, and
Mhm.
pull some letters out. Um, and and again, you're not going to say, "Oh, let's get that M." You're going to say, "Let's get the
Mm.
or let's get the A out, or the P." Right.
Mhm.
So you'll get some letters out, and you'll kind of just start exploring them and maybe putting some together. Like right now I've got the and the A, and I'll read it. I'll actually take my finger, put my finger underneath it,
You wanna
and
try and
read.
it
Oh,
out here?
sure. We can see if that works. So you
High-tech
guys
solution,
can kind of
guys.
see. So it's okay.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, you actually can take your finger, and as I read the sounds with the child, I'll actually put my finger underneath them. So I'll go ah, right, and then we can add another letter, and I would read app, right. So map.
Yeah.
But again, your child is probably going to be like, "Oh, let's see what this says, Mom. Let's read this one." Um, and then you'll be faced with like, "What do I do now? Am I going to read this?" I think that's correct. Okay, so let's just say your child has made this monstrosity of a word. This is actually really great for them, to just put random letters down and for you to practice sounding them out. Now, they don't actually mean anything in a word in English, but you can practice reading it. Ag, ed, magid. What does that say, Mom? It says magid. And ha, I did it. We made a word, right? So
right.
children are often really excited when you do put words together like this. And then, as David mentioned before, you can switch out some letters. So maybe you have mad. So you've got ad. And then you're going to switch out the d, and you're going to say, what if instead of d, we put p there? And so we just changed mad into map, right? So you can just keep on playing this game. You can say, well, you know what if we take away the and we put a d there. Now we've got d, app, dap, right? And what if we take away the d and we put a g there? Then we've got g, app, right? And then what if we take away this and we're going to make a nonsense word here, and we put an in the middle. Now we've got g, ep, right? So you kind of see how we're just like playing around with certain letters. Now, if your child seems overwhelmed with the whole entire box of the movable alphabet, then you can just take out some letters to play with. So maybe you're like, we're just gonna play with a word family of words. Maybe we're gonna play with the word mop, and I'll just get out a few letters that we could use, to change like mop into other map or something.
Mat.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just get out like a couple consonants and then all of the vowels, and we'll just like play putting in a lot of different vowels. So this is science-based teaching reading. I mean, this is science-based. This is what a modern reading expert would tell you to do. This is what we would do with a child that might be diagnosed as dyslexic or with a learning reading or writing disorder. This and it works for everybody. So if we give all children this really rich approach to teaching writing and reading, then we've like covered it. So it really is something that works for everybody. It is not something, it's an investment that will last a long time for you. So don't think of a movable alphabet as being only the thing that your child will do until they learn to write with a pencil. It actually is really great for them when you're working with spelling words. And we use it in the lower elementary classroom as well. So in lower elementary Montessori, we still use the movable alphabet because it's just easier for children. It's just fun. It's easy for children to see the spellings of things, and we can change up the spellings of things. So these little games that you play in the beginning And it might just start off with like, let's just sound out the letters, sound out our names. And your name may or may not be phonetic. My name happens to be Aubrey. So if I were writing it with a movable alphabet, it would probably be spelled with an O originally, right? Because we would be teaching the sound aw along with the letter O in with the sandpaper letters. So, and that kind of stuff can feel uncomfortable for parents. Maybe in school you remember being criticized for your spelling, or you remember a big emphasis on
spelling
on being able to spell. And in Montessori, we actually just say, don't correct their spelling. And parents will ask me, for how long, Aubrey? Do I just not correct their spelling? Like, how long? When can I start correcting them? But when do I get to jump in there and say, that's wrong? This is the way to spell it. Because for us as adults, it's just like, sometimes it just really rubs us the wrong way. It just drives us crazy. The desire to
correct is very powerful.
Well, not only that, but like seeing something misspelled feels so uncomfortable.
Especially if you were, if you learn, as I did, and I think you did too, that there are rules about spelling and you have to memorize them, and you take a spelling test every week. And
yeah. And that is one way to focus on spelling. But the research these days says that actually analyzing the words has a better and a lot more long-lasting effect on the child's learning to spell. Like, it's just more effective teaching.
Because it's moving away from just a rote memorization to an actual deeper understanding, which is where learning always happens, at the understanding of it.
Through the movable alphabet, we are teaching critical thinking skills, problem solving, all that good stuff, creativity, all the good stuff that you want for your child, that we want for every child. But that traditional teaching techniques where you're just like copying down the words does not activate in the brain.
Now, to be really clear, it's not that you never want your child to learn how to spell words. It's the mindset, though, really. So if they misspell a word, you're going to use that technique that we've talked about in the past, where you're going to say something like, oh, that's great. You made, or you wouldn't say, oh, that's great. You'd say, you spelled the word caught, C-O-T. I bet, let's see, C-A-T. So there's a acknowledgement of the effort, and that combined with the correction, and rather than just like, nope, that's wrong. You didn't spell cat at all. You spelled the wrong word. And it's kind of a mindset. It's a Montessori mindset. I don't know how else you would say that more eloquently than I did, but that's the idea. So is this an important material? Well, it's on our 21 list for a reason. It's very, very valuable. In fact, it's invaluable for the reasons we've discussed. You can buy sets. They're sold all over now. You can get them both at specialty places. You can get them on Amazon. You can always DIY a lot of this stuff. Some things are harder to DIY, but at the beginning, Aubrey shared that example, and I remember really well now. Those tiles were not, they weren't even cut out letters, but they were clear, and you were able to color code them so that it got the concept across, and the child was able to use them, or the children, many children actually, were able to use them. So definitely possible. You can DIY them pretty easily. You can buy at craft stores. Sometimes they sell letters, as long as they, Aubrey talked about the lowercase is really nice when you can find them, and then you can paint them yourself. Sometimes you can find them on a foam board or foam core, or you can even use a die cut. Sometimes you can find a die cut that'll cut them out for you, or you can use an X-Acto or scissors to cut them out. There's all kinds of ways that you can make a set. And I would highly encourage you, I think we both would definitely encourage you to either buy one or make one. They're just so much
paper.
fun.
There are printable versions of movable alphabets, and they work great. Just, try and print them on something a little bit thicker.
That's right.
And they really do work really well.
Yeah, because the goal is to give them this tool. It's allowing them to focus on this process of writing, which is allowing them to focus on the process of these word sounds, and these word sounds coming together and getting familiar and comfortable and having fun with language and having fun with writing. And that's going to turn them into more likely to help them become a lifelong lover of books and words.
Yes. So this is all stuff that we talk about in the Homeschool of the Redwoods primary and lower elementary courses. The movable alphabet is a Montessori essential, is a staple. So if you're interested in going deeper check out one of those 2 courses. And this is where we're going to end for today. So thank you all for joining. And if you have questions or feedback, you can definitely email us at hello@childoftheredwoods.com.
Yeah. And if you like the show, give us a thumbs up. Leave a comment. We love hearing the feedback and your thoughts. You can also, as I said at the beginning, listen to this as a podcast. Head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com/free, to get the links to subscribe and a bunch of other freebies, including this essentials list and our homeschool planner mini course, all kinds of fun stuff there. So
we'll be back next week.
We will be back next week. We're doing real life Montessori adventures. That'll be good.
So 1 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll see you then. Take care, everyone.